We're not independent, we're not separate from nature or from ourselves. We are actively complicit in the co-creation of each other and the environment.
Deep listening is hearing those stories that are labeled as racist and labeled as oppressive and having a conversation about that.
Once you wake up to the bigger picture, and there's such a clear sign that people long for something else, they long for something that is essentially more human.
The most important thing that we can do right now in the world is to support unlearning.
This week, as the world burns with more complex violence and we feel the pain of the children screaming and all affected by what is unfolding in the Gaza Strip, we bring you some compelling voices for these times. Not related to this war, but words of medicine for those understanding our world and the systems we live within. Starting on Sunday is Navaratri, the festival of the goddess Durga, who is the warrior and represents the power of love over the love of power. Some of you know that I have a strong relationship with this Hindu deity and the energies that she represents. I will be holding a sadhana, a practice of chanting mantras every day from the 15th to the 24th. It brings great strength and courage, connecting you to your inner power and sacred activism. I will be sharing more about the myth of the goddess Durga and this 9-night battle that she takes part in, as well as some asana practice and other ways to connect to this energy within you. You are welcome to join me. More details here in the show notes. We will also be hosting our Soul Space for members next week on the 18th of October. Please do join our membership and come be in this sacred space of alchemy together. Last week, I had the great pleasure of attending the Planet Local Summit in Bristol. And whilst I was there, reconnecting in person with many of the guests that were on early episodes of this podcast. There will be new conversations coming soon. But until then, we share with you the beginning of these 4 special episodes with an invitation to go back through the archives of now 6 years of this podcast and listen to these episodes in their entirety and others that you might find. Of course, we are always changing, and everyone has learnt a lot since what they share here. Sometimes we can relearn something or unlearn something from listening to what we shared in the past. There are many books that have stood the test of time and still offer deep, deep wisdom, even though they were written many moons ago. And it's the same with a podcast like this one, where what's shared here is wisdom and perspectives and depth that carries through in this timeless way. The voices we are weaving together in this episode are Bayo Akomolafe, a one-of-a-kind thinker. Bayo blurs the lines between the personal and the political. His playful and poetic voice calls us to unlearn, rethink, and radically imagine the world and our role within it. Bayo is the author of the books These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. He is also the founder and chief curator of the Emergence Network. We recorded this conversation, episode 13, on a cloudy day at Schumacher College in Devon in person. You will then hear from Dr. Lyla June Johnson. Lyla June is an Indigenous musician, author, and community organizer of Navajo and Cheyenne and European lineages. Her multi-genre presentation style has engaged audiences across the globe towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. She blends her study of human ecology at Stanford, graduate work in Indigenous pedagogy, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her music perspectives and solutions. Her doctoral research focused on the ways in which pre-colonial Indigenous nations shaped large regions of Turtle Island, otherwise known as the Americas, to produce abundant food systems for humans and non-humans. This was recorded online, episode 99. We made this during the pandemic and shortly after my father died. Then you will hear from Helena Norberg-Hodge, who is a pioneer of the New Economy movement and the recipient of both the Right Livelihood Award and the Goy Peace Prize. Through books, articles, interviews, films, and public lectures on 5 continents, she has been promoting an economics of personal, social, and ecological well-being for more than 40 years. She is the author of the inspirational classic, Ancient Futures, the producer and co-director of the award-winning film, The Economics of Happiness, and the founder and director of Local Futures. She hosted the Planet Local Summit, which we were all just at in Bristol. Episode 22 was recorded at Schumacher College as well, in Devon, in person. And then finally, you hear from Manish Jain, a unique educator, radical unlearner, and ambassador for both human and more than human creativity. Manish is adept at turning conventional approaches to education, economics, and incarceration on their heads. He is the co-founder of Shikshanta, the People's Institute for Rethinking Education and Development, Swaraj University, India's first self-designed learning university, and the Ecoversities Alliance, a global network of alternative universities. This episode, episode 39, was recorded in person at midnight on a rooftop in Oroville, India, on the day of the 50th birthday celebration, and my own birthday. Don't forget, you can find these episodes and listen to the whole conversations, as each one is around an hour to an hour and a half and goes into so much more depth. In this powerful compilation called Future Paradigms, Compelling Voices in Urgent Times, we explore the question, how do we create radically new perspectives and prosper antidotes that forge systemic change? We learn about their personal lives and motivations to serve humanity and the wider living world, what it means to live in a post-truth world, how we can free ourselves from the reductionist and destructive systems of our time and its consequences, what antidotes we can cultivate to forge systemic change, how we can unschool, revolutionize learning, education, and create future vision to serve humans and more than humans better, sacred knowledge and activism, listening to each other and listening to Earth, localism, alternative food systems, and gift culture. We hope that these conversations spark possibility in you and the way in which you live your life and contribute to our regenerative future. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. I'm delighted today to be joined by Bayo Akomolafe. Thank you, Bayo. We're here at Schumacher College, and you have just finished a 3-week sacred activism course. So thank you for making time to have this conversation.
Thank you, Amisha. Great to be with you.
You actually just said something before we pressed record that I found really comforting. So I was sharing that today I feel a little bit out of sorts, having just had like a little bit of a moment that has left my heart a little bit aching. And can you share what you said?
Okay. Well, I had a moment with the beautiful people that gathered in the course. In my final remarks, I noted that there is to flesh it out a bit, there is a necessary incompleteness that goes with adventures and exploration such as ours. And that I would like them to notice that in a world that has thrived on the conception of separation, that nothing really touches each other, that there is some kind of ontological gap between us that cannot be bridged, that to be touched in any form, even if it's to be wounded, even if it's to open new wounds, even if it's to experience the gritty reality of another person, to be touched in any form is revolutionary. And that, to notice that can be comforting. And so bodies would claw against other bodies. We will sometimes fetishize each other when we meet each other. There'll be less than ideal circumstances where we hit each other and go different ways, but just to be in touch, just to be noticed, just to be held, just to be touched, I would say is probably the most revolutionary thing in a world that thrives on separability. Yeah.
Mm. And so this pattern of feeling of being wounded, of touching each other's wounds, that often we might think of that as bad.
Yeah.
And it's definitely painful.
Yeah.
But actually to honor that we are touching each other.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so indeed. I mean, I can't remember who said this, but I think I wrote this to my son, in a journal, that if you find yourself right all the time, if you're correct, if you have it all figured out, if you know where to go at all times, then look around you, you're probably alone. So, to be flawed, to be wronged, to be wounded, to be touched in less than ideal ways is to recognize that we are in a world of other beings. We live and thrive and emerge in the orbit of other beings, and that is beautiful and tragic all at once. Yeah, the world is substantiated with shadows, so our multidimensionality means that it's sometimes painful to be a body, to be embodied, to be real. Yeah, it's the realness that means that also gives us access to joy and ecstasy. So.
And we're living in a time that, I don't think there was ever a time that wasn't very real, but we're living in a time where there is a lot going on. On the course description for this course, you talk about it being a world of post-truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Post-truth, fake news, fake news. Well, if you were to go academic or to explore the historicity of these moments, you might encounter the term postmodernism. And for those who are listening at this point in time, there isn't a generally agreed upon concept of the postmodern, but it is probably recognizable when you hear people say that this is my truth and that is your truth. We don't need to meet. There's no objective referent. My truth, your truth. And you see that kind of social arrangement breeds a kind of cavalier attitude towards what we might, with some form of hesitation, call truth. So it's that anything goes, anything matters. I could do anything I want because there's no truth, there's no foundation. Well, I wouldn't describe myself as a postmodernist. I don't want to say go a little bit further, but I would say that I'm recognizing the invitation to see the world differently, not to see it as, lacking truth, but to see it as emergent, to notice that there's still something to be accountable to. In previous times, in some modernist frame, we might say that truth is foundational, that there is only one way to see the world. And it's from this idea that colonization came about. If it's universal, and everywhere, regardless of context or culture, should agree to this. And that's how colonization breeds. Postmodernism was the refutation of that. There are no foundations, right? But I think it's somewhere in the middle of noticing that the world is real. It's not just based on language or story. The world is real. There are things beyond story. There are things beyond plot. But that the world is also moving. It's emergent. It's alive. So the world is not reducible to human agency, our attempt to just change things with a snap of our fingers. That's human hubris. But to notice that the world is alive and that it's also active, it's also might be called an activist as well, that the world is also contributing to how it emerges, is to have some sort of humility, is to notice that we are small and yet we are large because we're what the world is doing. So it's a different ground altogether, not the post-truth world, but a different kind of recognition that we are part of what the world is doing, and the world is living and alive beyond story.
And then when you say the world is alive and is an activist, by that you mean nature as well as the world in terms of the societal constructs, technology, everything else that we've created.
Beautiful. Most philosophers might divide between mind and matter, and that's some kind of Cartesian distinction. Mind is our discussions, our conversations, the world of human, activity. Matter is this dead, natural resource, basically. This mechanistic Newtonian realm that is only good because we use it in terms of utility. We use it as it's instrumental to our own goals and ends. It's a very phallic notion of nature, and it was created in the time of the burning times when witches were burned and when science was distinguishing itself from religion and saying, we have nothing to do with that. You guys take care of religion, truth and beauty. We'll deal with facts. And so this domain called nature was created in that time. But that's all imploding, if you will. And we're now noticing that mind is already implicated in matter, and matter is already implicated in mind. So the world of human activity and technology and social configurations and language is already part of nature, and nature is already implicated in that. So that you hear terms like material, spiritual as one word, or nature, culture as a single word. So that already changes the paradigm in noticing that the world is thick and alive in that way. Then we can let go of some of our pride in saying that we are to change the world, for instance, or that we have it all figured out, or that the world outside of us has nothing to offer us except as something utilitarian or something we can use. This would honor the indigenous traditions that tell us that a tree is wise or that a mountain has something to teach us. Yeah. Yeah.
What does sacred activism mean?
Oh, it took us 3 weeks and we still haven't figured that out.
Oh, I was hoping you would have come to a conclusion by the end of the course.
Well, I would say that, first of all, I do not think that sacred activism is sacred plus activism, like adding what we might term as sacred rituals to the convention of activism. Of course, not that I would say that activism is some kind of monolithic entity, but I also want to dispute the idea that what we name as sacred activism is just adding, yoga to your normal acts of protest or something. And there's another very popular conception that if only we can add indigenous traditions to what we already are doing, then we can get to where we want to go faster. So it's like a shortcut to our destination, our fixed destination. So let us sit in a circle and let us hum together, and then let us hit the streets. But maybe there is a different conception here, that it's not so much about heading for the same destination, the same objectives we've had before. It's about noticing the world differently. It's a total reconfiguration of everything. It's a reimagining of what it means to be alive, what it means to be human, and what it is the world is contributing to what we're doing. So I would put it this way, in some kind of simple, easy to follow format. So what if we took seriously the idea that we're all entangled? And I don't mean entanglement in the less than disciplined sense in which it is used in some circles. I mean it in terms of noticing that we are always contingent. We're not independent. That is the ruse of modernity. We're not independent. We're not separate from nature or from ourselves. We are actively complicit in the co-creation of each other and the environment. I think the notion of the Anthropocene already teaches us that. We cannot divorce ourselves from geology or ecology or anything of that sort. So the question is, what happens if we notice that we are part and parcel of what the world is doing? What does that do to our claims of absolute knowledge or exteriority? Like we can divorce ourselves and notice the world from a disinterested point of view. What happens then to our claims to knowledge, to our manifestos and blueprints? What happens to our claims to be the only source of agency in a world that is now telling us that it's alive and it can interrupt and it can resist being articulated? What happens to all of that? And what if the ways we respond to crisis is also part of the crisis? What if we never act alone? We act in collectives, so that in just giving a single gesture, we are bringing generations, human and non-human, into the room in that single moment. So it's an aesthetic of entanglement. It's not quite, at my conception of sacred activism, it's not quite, hey, here's how to change the world. Mm-hmm. Or here's a new spanking new epistemology that will teach you how to get to source, that will teach you the fundamentals, that will help you survive at every moment in time. It's not that. It is a slowing down in times of urgency. It is noticing anew. It is listening to places that have been termed nonsensical or unintelligible. It is learning to slow down. It is learning to trust in shadows. It is meeting monsters. And I can only put it poetically, but I think it's an invitation to linger at the thresholds. And in doing that, enable capacities that are missing at the moment. Hopefully, possibly.
And so with that, what if you are an activist that goes out and protests and fights and writes campaigns and, is on the front line of trying to change policies, trying to prevent harmful chemicals from being dumped into our food or into the oceans? How do you begin to integrate this understanding?
There is no integration. So the notion of an integration already presumes, again, here's a tool. Now add it to your activity. No, there is no integration. Uh-huh. And it's not a dismissal, at least in my conception of it, which I specifically call post-activism for a reason that I don't think we can go into at length, because it might involve a little bit of Deleuze and quantum mechanics and all of that. But the notion that we can just add it to the kitty, just put it in a bag, is not part of this at all. The invitation here is to notice that none of those things you've mentioned are to be dismissed. They're not less than or inferior ways. We want to pay attention to the specific modes of engagement that we are employing in the world today, and how that is meaningful and situated and grounded in our living realities. A post-activism is therefore not some furtherance of activism, but an invitation to say, could it be that there are other ways of responding to this crisis that we are not noticing? So the conditions for doing this are not always present. Like if my daughter fell into a pit, like I've been saying throughout these weeks, if my daughter fell into a pit, like that poor child in, I think, the state of Ohio in the US, that fell into, is it Harambe? The gorilla's silverback gorilla. A child fell in there. I don't think I would preach slowing down in that moment. The specificity of that moment would invite me to do all I can to save my daughter. So this is not a pompous, high horse, philosophical take on activism. It's actually a noticing that we act in very messy ways to the things that present themselves to us. So protest is not less than or inferior. It is situated in that moment. We have to fight sometimes. The politics of a specific moment would invite us to fight, would invite us to raise our voices, would invite us to vote or do anything or even create a new app, right? Mm-hmm. However, there is a need for us to explore what it means to act and respond. The politics of responsivity is what this is about. What if the ways we respond actually perpetuates the crisis we're trying to escape? What if in the name of change, we're just shifting around the same pieces we're used to? So this is actually some kind of a sanctuary-making ritual of asking new questions, of seeing our seeing, of questioning our questions. And in doing that, hopefully making space to be porous, to be permeable. I think that's the word. And hoping that other things can meet us in the process. Again, it's an aesthetic that can move into the realm of practice and that can move into the realm of conversation. But it's a feeling, it's a noticing, it's a questioning.
I am delighted to be here with you, Lyla June, and welcome you to The Future is Beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
For this conversation, it's part of our series, Listening to Each Other, Listening to Earth. And I would love for you to share what that means to you and how that shows up in your life and in your work.
Yeah, those are two very big topics and have some overlap, but are also have a lot of universes within themselves. So I'll just start with listening to each other. For me, that is very important today. I mean, it's always been important, but we're kind of being forced to listen to each other in more ways than perhaps in the past. And I think particularly about my context in what is now called America. You know, we like to call Turtle Island as Native peoples because America is after Amerigo Vespucci, who was commissioned to look for people to enslave and commissioned to look for gold for European powers. So we don't think it's appropriate to call this place America at all. So Turtle Island, this context, it's becoming, we're starting to listen in new ways with the Black Lives Matter movement really fueling so many conversations and with various statues being brought down of people who sort of embody various cultural groups and also embody the disenfranchisement of other cultural groups. So listening to each other here for me is a big topic and something we're learning how to do and succeeding in many ways and failing in others. It really actually comes into contact with the realm of child psychology because, for instance, if we take down a statue of Robert E. Lee, who was a Confederate general, there are two stories to be heard at that time. And one story is about the Black folks who are wanting to tear down monuments that glorify their oppression, and because they don't think that oppression is very glorious at all. And then on the other side, you have people in the South who were destroyed by people in the North and lost the Civil War, also are dealing with the eradication of their, or rather the demonization of their very identity. And obviously, I don't think Robert E. Lee statues should be anywhere, because he was a proponent of slavery and was very involved in that system. And at the same time, I think that to truly listen to each other, to create a safe space, that we could actually have more communication. For instance, when you're a person from the South and you have a Confederate flag in your window your whole life because your mom and your dad did, and you have light complected skin, and you were taught since birth that the North was brutal and terrible to your people, which they were. You know, they razed entire towns to the ground here in the South. And you are raised as a child in this situation. And then all of a sudden, someone wants to tear down Robert E. Lee statue. You have to understand that they are having their childhood identity and everything they hang their hat on dismantled, and not only dismantled, but villainized. And so that is something I think we can help them through in a compassionate way, to understand that. In other words, how do you break the news to someone that everything they've been taught is skewed? Mm-hmm. And as a Native woman, we constantly, as Native people, have to break that news to people. And we are sometimes met with vehement opposition, which can be labeled as racism, which in the end of the day it is. And also there's more complexity to it. How do you break the news to an American child that the Pledge of Allegiance was actually a form of ideological management, that the fireworks on the 4th of July celebrating the independence of America, that very country is founded on slavery and genocide? How do you break the news to, and some people already know this and they do it anyways, but a lot of people are indoctrinated into this story, the story of glory and beauty and civilization and progress, so much so that the rest of the world is trying to flock here to be a part of it. That's what I think deep listening is right now to each other, is hearing those stories that are labeled as racist and labeled as oppressive, and having a conversation about that. There's more I could say on that, but I think I'll leave that there for now. And listening to the earth is a very big topic too, because most of us, myself included, don't know how to do that anymore. We've been de-skilled, almost like a cat is declawed, or a bird gets their wings clipped. Like, our inherent design to be connected to the earth has been systematically stripped away from us through the economics of convenience, right? And just get in your car and drive there. You don't have to walk over any mountains anymore. You don't have to understand the trail systems. You don't have to breathe in the air. You can just breathe in air-conditioned air. Just go to the store and buy some chicken. You don't have to know what it means to raise a chicken, what it means to behead a chicken, what it means to pluck a chicken, what it means to use every bit of that chicken to honor it, because it has become your relative. It has become something that you treasure. Get the water from a water bottle from the gas station. And that way you'll never have to know what it means to take care of a river. You'll never have to know what it means to depend on that river for your very being. and therefore you much more liable to destroy that river without flinching because you're not connected to it, you're not interdependent with it. De-skilling, where capitalism has brought everything we could ever want for probably most of us listening to this podcast, maybe not all of us, to our doorstep. Literally, Amazon will bring it to your doorstep. We've been de-skilled, and we seem very civilized and we seem very sophisticated as a society, but actually we are heavily dependent on a very, very fragile and inherently unsustainable system. And so what does that mean? That means we either relearn the skill of living close to the earth around us, or many, many, many people suffer, not if the system collapses, but when it collapses. Because if you base your entire society on a finite resource, aka petroleum, you can't go on that way forever. That's why I say when the system collapses. We already know all that deep down. And when COVID hit, we're having to listen to ourselves, listen to our desire to plant seeds. And now everybody's planting seeds. I planted seeds this spring. And so everyone's remembering how to be rooted. Everyone's remembering how to at least try to get prepared, because we're not so involved in the capitalist system and it's not stealing away our time. That, of course, it's different in every case. But to me, listening to the land means reskilling ourselves in the process of living, truly living. And my PhD dissertation is on Indigenous food systems and Indigenous land management, and how do we rekindle those. And it turns out that Native peoples in Turtle Island were incredibly adept at managing the land in a way that fed them bountifully and sustainably. Right here in this area in Kentucky, the Shawnee managed a hickory nut, chestnut, walnut, acorn, sumpweed, goosefoot forest. They managed that forest for 3,000 years, according to the fossilized pollen record. So they could do it. We can do it. We can have a system that not only feeds us bountifully, but will last longer than 300 years, which is America's not even 300 years old and it's already collapsing. So those would be my two answers there.
There's so much in that that we can explore. The question that's coming up for me is, how do you reconcile all the different parts of yourself and the different worlds in which you live?
Sure. So I think that is not a question I can fully answer because I'm still working on it. But I'm half Native. We say Indigenous. Other people say Native American. I go to Indonesia and they call us Red Indians. It's just funny all over the world. And then you go to some places of the world, they don't even know we exist. So, but anyways, as an Indigenous woman on my mother's side, and then my father is mostly European. And that is very hard to be, half Native and half Indigenous, because there's a conflict inherent in you if you haven't done the work, or if your parents haven't done the work. I have seen that compassion, understanding, and forgiveness are the way to reconcile things, none of which is very easy, and none of which, well, it is easy, but this society doesn't train us or give us the tools on how to do those things very well. It's more of the dog eat dog, zero-sum, cutthroat type of world. So what I realized is, when you have compassion and understanding, very, very often your abuser was abused. And so when you think about that, you no longer disdain them. You have pity for them and compassion. For instance, Native people here have been and still are being brutalized by Euro-American people, both consciously and unconsciously. We have been obliterated. 98% of us, they say, were wiped out in the initial years of colonization. We're hurting. We're in a lot of pain. We're surviving most times. To understand that Euro-Americans descend by and large from cultures who were themselves colonized, looking at Europe and seeing how millions of women were obliterated through the persecution of witches. Millions of women were affected, I should say. Many were harmed and even killed and murdered and burned alive and drowned alive, but many were alive in the time of persecution and were affected. You also have the Roman expansion, which was brutal and heartless and obliterated many indigenous cultures of Europe. Even calling it Europe is kind of like calling this land America, because Europa is a Greco-Roman figure. It's a woman who was kind of used as collateral between the gods, sort of a very patriarchal objectification of women. So if you call Europe that, if you call the land after that woman, what are you saying? That she's collateral and that she's an object. And so it's really a whole story of colonization in Europe, especially in, well, not especially, but one of the ones I know a lot about is in England, where in the 1200s, King Edward I ordered the massacre of over 100 Celtic harpists. And you have also destruction of the bards, who were the Scottish storytellers. So the bards were the ones who carried the songs, the stories, the poetry, the culture, really. And so when they would come in, they would kill the bards first, and they would bury them face down so that their stories would die with them. So that cultural destruction of, and also the Welsh, if you were caught speaking Welsh in school as late as the 1920s, you would get a block of wood tied around your neck with the letters WN written on it, which stood for Welsh not. The only way you could get the Welsh not off of your neck is if you caught another kid speaking Welsh. So I think to reconcile all of these things here in Turtle Island, we have to understand that the people who washed up on our shores and committed genocide, committed slavery, etc., were themselves a highly traumatized population who had suffered thousands and thousands of years of warfare. I did a quick search of wars in Spain, and I counted, how many? I think I counted 28 documented periods of warfare in Spain in the last 2,000 years. And so when you have that much war and destruction and ravaging and trauma, that gets passed down to the children, and the children don't have any tools to process the trauma because all of the healing cultures and the ceremonial cultures have been destroyed. So I think that's what I do to reconcile things, is not make excuses for people and say, oh, well, they just didn't know better and they were traumatized, because we can hold each other to higher standards, but also have compassion and understanding as we hold each other to higher standards and say, we don't want to replicate this again and again and again. That's how it has gone for me.
It's so powerful. I've heard you share the example of men in Scotland that when they were getting married, their wives would first have to sleep with a British lord before the marriage, and that kind of level of violation and humiliation, going right into the sanctity of our wisdom and where we keep our wisdom in the body, and that this is a theme throughout colonization, that all of us have these stories in our ancestry, and then they're living in us.
Yeah, yeah, we do. As my mother says, Pat McCabe, who some of you may know, she says that we are a traumatized species. That kind of sums it up. We are a traumatized species. And that is not our fault at the end of the day. This is getting into a little more esoteric realm of things, but we understood in native culture about coyote. Coyote is the trickster. Coyote is a spirit who basically makes things hard. And that's an understatement when you look at the torture that this being is willing to inflict. When we understand Coyote was one of the first people to be here to take care of the earth, one of the first guardians, and that being turned on creation and is itself a part of creation, but turned on creation as well, you start to understand that our brains as human beings have a purpose. Our brains have a purpose to take care of the land, to take care of prayers and spiritual matters. There's a spiritual realm to all of this whole world, obviously. And so our brains are designed to help with holding the ancestors and bringing the flow of souls in and out. We have these brains for a reason, but Coyote has taken advantage of these brains, these highly complex psychological things. You can traumatize that brain in a way that you can't necessarily other species in the same way. Our very nature has been turned in on ourselves. It's really sad because Coyote, or some cultures call it Iktome. There's a word in Buddhism for this being as well. I think it's either Mara or something like that. But anyways, a lot of cultures understand that this being is our brother who turned on us. And so we pray for it. And we also had stories, Coyote stories, to understand how to detect the tricks that it gives to the world. A lot of our native societies were afflicted by Coyote for a long time. And slowly over time, we evolved to create spaces where it couldn't really get in anymore. And the Coyote stories helped us with that. They helped the children understand, like, if you're doing this, you're letting Coyote trick you. Or here's a story about Coyote. Don't be like that. Don't be the one who eats everything for himself. That's a Coyote thing. And in these stories, Coyote's always getting it's always coming back on him. He's always trying to do something clever, but then he ends up being the one who gets hurt or something. And so we never saw it as a big scary being or anything. We more saw it as a coyote, kind of skinny and lanky and likes to hide and likes to trick. We were never scared of it, but we understood it, and we understood that it was there. That spirit has been wreaking havoc on humanity and the earth, because it can't hurt creator, right? It can't hurt God, so to speak, but it can do the next best thing, which is hurt creator's creation, which is us. And so it does that a lot, and it targets the root of life, because it has a lot of tools. It was designed to protect the world, so it has all the tools to do that. It has all the knowledge to do that. It knows about child psychology. It knows about atmospheric science. It knows about physics and all these things. It was given that, endowed with that knowledge, but it's using that knowledge to destroy creation. That being has been wreaking havoc for a long time. It attacks the root of life, which is what? It is the women and it is the water. So it knows what to attack. It knows how to create rifts in communities. It knows all the things, right? So I don't want to get into the idea that humans are a traumatized species because there's something wrong with us. There's actually everything right with us, but we're under a lot of pressure right now to just be. Really, it's quite hard being human.
How do you feel we can be human in a way that is more attuned to our beauty
Sure. Well, that's another big question, because you have a lot of ceremony that was designed to do that, and now a lot of that ceremony is gone. How do we live as beings who are connected to ourselves and to others and to the earth and to creator first and foremost, when all of the tools that we had to do that are very intentionally obliterated? How do we do that? How do we create those spaces again? That's a very, very big question that would take weeks to answer, because we are in a space that doesn't necessarily, not only has it taken those ceremonies away from us, but it's also made it very challenging to recover those ceremonies, if that makes sense. It's almost blocked us away from those ceremonies. And for instance, why do we feel good when we are sitting in a forest looking at a pond? Why do we feel good when we climb on top of a hill and feel the wind blowing on our face and see the expanse of Mother Earth before us? Why do we feel good when we are taking an evening hike and see the sun start to set? Why do those colors and those clouds and those hues, why do they just completely inspire us and make us feel alive again? And that's because Creator designed this world to be connected to us, and it designed us to be connected to it. And yet somehow we have managed to create these artificial environments. I mean, they're not artificial, they are made, but they're not of Creator's vision. So you have many, many, many people who are living inside 90% of their lives, if not more. You have many, many people who are living in situations where they don't feel that breeze, they don't see those trees or those ponds, especially youth, living in urban areas. And instead, they're given these really not sufficient alternatives, like little pacifiers, and putting them in their mouths, which are like social media, video games. And I'm not trying to bash on video games or social media, because people do that enough, but we aren't living the way we were designed to live. To be attuned to ourselves as human beings and to be attuned to the beauty of being human. I mean, this might sound too easy, but just go outside. Not everyone has that privilege. Not everyone has that luxury. You have whole urban centers where these children, like I said, we're not only had those ceremonies taken away, but there's all these obstacles between us and that ceremony. You'd have to hop on a train and go to 30 minutes out that you might not even have money to get on the train. You'd have to basically go somewhere you've never been before and hope that it's going to be safe and get out into Mother Earth. A lot of our ability to reconnect has been systematically taken away. But the question is, how do we connect? And I think, getting outside, researching our culture, researching our ancestors, always go deeper than what you think you have to go. Because as Native people, we don't have to go that deep. We can find the ancestors and the beauty that they stood with, and the grace. I don't know, I guess I want to say like the honor and the virtue with which they stood. And we can see and we can be proud of who we are. But with others, for instance, if you're a European American, you might not necessarily feel that. You might feel as though your ancestors weren't something to be proud of. They were slave owners, they were committed genocide, etc. But that's what I mean to go deeper, because you're not actually American. You're Irish, or you're Portuguese, or you're Celtic, or you're Hungarian, you're Swedish. Go into those cultures and understand them, because there's medicine there.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
I'm delighted today to be joined by Helena Norberg-Hodge. Welcome to the show.
Very happy to be here.
I'd like to start with just getting a real understanding of how much corporations affect our daily lives, because we all know that they do. And we all kind of maybe make sort of jokes about, oh, it's just the corporations, or of course they're doing that. But when you actually get down to it and you hear all the examples, it is actually really shocking.
Yeah.
And we've become a bit desensitized to it.
I would say we've become almost totally desensitized to it, because it's been going on for quite a while. And I just often wonder how people understand anything if they haven't had the experience I did of being outside of this whole system. And then as I came back from this remote part of the Tibetan plateau, things became so crystal clear. But no, we're swimming in a sea shaped by corporate desires. And we need to remember these corporations are not human beings. They're structures that are a mixture of blind reductionist thinking and ever larger scale and ever greater speed. It's almost better to think of them as this sort of money-generating machine, inside which are human beings who generally have a very limited understanding of what they're doing and the damage they inflict. But as a machine, it's a very, very powerful and destructive tool, and it's shaped our school curricula. It has shaped ever more also big science and the media. So almost every avenue of knowledge is being shaped by big money today. I think one of the most important things we need to become conscious of, we talk a lot about consciousness, is to distinguish between that machine-like imposition on by now most of humanity, and who we really are. Who are we as human beings? What do we really want? And what is evolution? Many people confuse the process of evolution with a process of techno-economic change, which is only happening because of policies. It's happening because of political choices. They also tend to think ever more today, especially, that all of this is coming about because we humans are by nature greedy and acquisitive, and I completely differ with that. Some examples of this crazy influence is also within the environmental movement, that so much thinking has been distorted because of big money funding the big ideas.
When you talk about it as being a machine, it almost gives me this image of we watch all these like apocalyptic movies, and I don't personally watch many of them because they give me nightmares, but we think about humanity being like taken over by aliens or something, and it's almost like that's what's happened, and something else is controlling us, even though there are human beings working for these systems. That has become way more powerful than the humans.
Well, I think there is no doubt that there is a process whereby this techno-economic machine is becoming extremely powerful, and yet I think the power is entirely a function of our lack of consciousness. There is nothing inherently powerful there, and we are talking, if we look at it clearly, about a system where fewer and fewer people are winning. And, if we really step back and look at winners, yes, we can now say about 8 men have more wealth than half the global population, and that sounds like winning. But even they, have their children affected by toxic pollution and this intense stress and anxiety that's imposed, particularly now on young people. So when it really comes down to it, there are almost no winners, if any. So it's really mad if we allow this blind system to just continue mowing down life. It really is decimating life. And if people could just see clearly that the very same processes whereby we have created this alarming climate change, decimation of species, toxic pollution, that very, very same process is creating massive job insecurity, an identity crisis, and I mean literally virtually every human being that's touched by this system is influenced in a way that destroys self-esteem and a genuine sense of real confidence and empowerment. It's making a joke of democracy. It's really ridiculous in today's world to think that we have democracy, because we've got a globalized media that is spelling out the issues in a completely false left-right dichotomy that is actually no dichotomy at all. In a systemic way, left and right have been doing the same thing now particularly since the Second World War, supporting a process whereby giant multinational banks and corporations get more and more and more power. And, they're now in a legal position where they're holding our governments by the neck and telling them, if you do anything at all that might reduce our profit-making potential, we will sue you. And they take them into these kangaroo courts that are, you have the same guy literally in the morning representing a corporation, and in the afternoon supposedly adjudicating in some kind of just way, in this mad situation where corporations are genuinely ruling the world and punishing governments that dare to step out of line.
So there's been some interesting examples with the tobacco companies.
Yes.
On this.
Yeah. Well, the tobacco companies for a long time have sued, and they threaten, tiny little island states, if they dare to put anything on the packaging that this might not be good for your health, they'll be sued, by, many millions of dollars. But you also have a nuclear power company in Sweden suing Germany for 3.7 billion euros because Germany decided after Fukushima to phase nuclear power out. So this nuclear power company that was planning to build lots of profitable nuclear power plants says, give us 3.7 billion. You have states and governments sued if they try to ban a toxic chemical that has been proven to be toxic and harmful to health. Under these trade treaties, they're not allowed to do that. They're going to have to pay a huge fine. So these clauses in global trade treaties which are sometimes just bilateral between two countries and sometimes multilateral, like the TPP or TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between Europe and the US. They have these clauses called ISDS, which stands for Investor-State Dispute Settlements. And it's my conviction that if people knew about this, people in government, people in corporations, they would not go along with it. they wouldn't get away with pretending we have democracy or pretending that this is a capitalist system. It's not capitalist. No self-respecting capitalist believes in hidden subsidies and in regulating some businesses and not other businesses. And that's what's happening. Every place-based business, local, regional, national, are subject to ever heavier regulations, big bureaucracy, which is getting far too big, and they're squeezed for taxes. And in the meanwhile, these giants like Apple and Google and Monsanto and Coca-Cola move around freely, pay virtually no tax, and they're subsidized. So it really is an important story for people to wake up to.
But when you say if people knew, surely they do know.
No, absolutely not. They don't. If people have read about particularly this really dark secret about trade treaties, of these clauses where they sue governments, vast majority of people don't know about it. People who do, economists and finance ministers and so on, we don't yet have a new economy movement, or if we want to call it a people's movement that is concerned about both human rights and the environment, laying out clearly on a silver platter, look, these treaties lead to this and this and that, and fundamentally to destruction of livelihoods, loss of identity, completely linked then in turn to epidemics of depression and anxiety. And they're driving up emissions at every turn. They're massively increasing the need for transport, packaging, and therefore the mountains of plastic. This is what these treaties are leading to. No, most people are not being forced to see that big picture. And that's why I'm so committed to what I call big picture activism, because there just isn't enough of it.
So for those of us that don't work in government,
yeah,
how do we integrate this knowledge into the way that we live?
Well, see, this is I think we need to be thinking about how did the organic movement start? Where did it come from? People became aware that the mode of agriculture that our governments were supporting against both left and right, they were subsidizing energy, chemical-intensive agriculture that was leading to, toxic food as well as destroying the land and wildlife. So what happened is more and more people started saying, this is not right. And in fact, most of those people were neither farmers nor in government. They were the average consumer, the average citizen who started raising the alarm. And in fact, if I look in my international work, most of them weren't even people who had particular knowledge of pesticides or botany or agriculture. They were just concerned citizens who didn't want to see their children eating toxic food, and they didn't want to see the land destroyed. And they started gathering together, they started speaking about it, they started writing about it, and worldwide have been able to have an impact on government. But so for me, civil rights movement, same thing. Without the help of that sort of average, usually middle-class citizen who had a little bit of time and ability to do something, that civil rights movement wouldn't have happened. It certainly wouldn't have come from government, and it wouldn't have come just from Black people themselves organizing. There was the support and the movement building that made it possible for such a big shift. And the interesting thing is that, in looking at the civil rights movement, at the organic movement, at the women's movement, what happened in South Africa with apartheid and all that, we're talking about movements that came out of a more specialized concern and a smaller segment of the population than what this new movement can represent. Because this movement we need for a fundamental shift away from corporate rule to genuine democracy really is something that benefits everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a potential to build a movement that is more powerful than ever before. And we see that in our work, that even here at this course I've just been teaching at Schumacher College, such a broad range of people from, in this case, I think we had about 8 different countries, different ages, different backgrounds. Some of them were what I call corporate refugees. Some of them, out of 25 people, I think there were about 8 who have either already left their corporate work or are thinking of doing so. So there is this coalition building growing, and it's between, a whole range from those primarily interested in the spiritual, deeper psychological issues and benefits, and in meditation, yoga, personal healing, to those interested in women's rights, in so-called third world development and poverty, in unemployment and economic dislocation right here. So across the whole board, coming together, not to suddenly merge into one organization, but singing to the same hymn sheet, recognizing that for all those issues, making this economic transition would solve this multitude of problems. And that's why it's so empowering. I mean, it's a big task trying to persuade people of big picture activism, mainly because people feel that this big system is just too big to even comprehend, but maybe most of all, they feel it's too big to change. Mm-hmm. That's the big obstacle we have.
I mean, I had an experience just been driving around the southwest this week, and driving from Oxford to Bristol, there's a wonderful service station that I don't know what it's called, but it doesn't have any of the normal shops that you have in a service station. It's a big farm shop, and they've got a little outside bit where you can sit, and they've got a little kind of bit of water, and you can see all the mountains, the hills. So actually, it's a very clever bit of architecture where you sit out and have your food, and you feel like right in the middle of the beauty of the nature that you're in. And your tea and coffee is cheaper or you get loyalty stamps if you've got your own keep cup, and they sell the keep cups, and there's nothing, everything's independent in the entire place. I was just so excited. It felt like it was so rejuvenating to be able to stop and actually be where I am, rather than be in these kind of, these fake worlds of like the service station where you're going to have the same chain, and you're not going to be able to find something as nourishing as you want, and you're not going to be able to just sit in nature and just recharge a little bit. And I was so excited. It just gave me this glimpse into another world that's possible.
Absolutely.
And I'm determined I'm going to go and find out who's behind that service station and interview them and find out how they did it.
Yes. And so often it's just about the vision and the understanding that there is a thirst for this. So there are several myths out there that keep getting reiterated. One of them is that this system is there because that's what we want. We're creating it. It's constantly hear people saying, we are doing this, we're trashing the planet, and then you hear in the climate movement, how can people be so stupid and resistant? They know about climate change. Why aren't they changing? And that discussion, that framing, never discusses the real reasons behind climate change. It's just pointing the finger at the individual consumer and citizen who is a victim of corporate machinations. And they don't even know about redundant trade, that most countries are routinely importing and exporting the same product in larger and larger quantities. So the UK exports milk and butter and imports in roughly the same quantities. The US exports about 1 billion tons of beef and turns around and imports about 1 billion tons of beef. So all of this is the main reason behind climate change, and that's not even being discussed. So yes, I mean, once you wake up to the bigger picture, and what you then discover is that This is not happening because people want it. There is such a clear sign that people long for something else. They long for something that is essentially more human, who we are, how we evolved. We evolved in much more human scale communities. We evolved much more deeply connected to nature. And so in us is this deep longing. And so we can see that people who can afford it will generally, of course, choose organic, local food. But when we're in a system where we have these hidden subsidies that make Walmart food cheaper than local, fresh, organic food, then it's not strange that people are choosing the cheaper, because they're at the same time being squeezed, horribly squeezed, as they pay more and more for their rent or for their mortgages. So it's what people want, and I bet you that will be immensely successful. I mean, the problem is that in a system of hidden subsidies and so on, it can be difficult to get something like that started. And how do you reach people? How do they know about it? Because again, our government, left and right, both parties, are supporting superhighways with special turnoffs for the whole McDonald's world. And that artificial world we go into, which is like, it's a very good example, because I was in one of those mainstream ones recently, and it is frightening. The lack of anything resembling natural, the commercial and ugly, and even the smell of the trans fat oils. I mean, it's really the ultimate in the artificial world,
and how
created
much
for profit for the few.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And then sometimes as consumers, we get blamed. Well, you're choosing the imported thing, and it's like, well, if the imported thing is half the price of the local thing, then a lot of us have to choose that, and it is very luxurious to be able to have local fair trade products.
Yeah, but beware also of the propaganda that therefore says that's elitist. When in fact we should be talking about the elitism for corporate profit. In other words, why are we helping to create ever bigger, fatter billionaires and giant corporations, and creating job insecurity and incredible stress and competition, particularly on young people who now are already in a situation where having their own home or having any kind of job security seems, an absurd and unreachable goal. So it really is very high time that we step back and look at this economic system for what it is.
Welcome to the show, Manish.
Thanks, Amisha. It's great to be here.
And thank you for finding time. We've tried to find this hour over the last few days, and here it is, the twilight hour.
Yeah, it's been a really amazing time here. So many beautiful people, but I'm really happy that we could do this, and the atmosphere is amazing. So, and my stomach is growling a little, but it's okay.
Can you start by sharing a little bit about your journey of how you ended up moving to India, to Rajasthan?
I was born in India, and I was kidnapped and taken to the United States by my parents. I grew up there. I had a very interesting childhood. I was like in school, but I wasn't really in school. I was like all involved in a ton of different things. And every time I tried to do something, it'd be called extracurricular. And I found that to be like an amazing learning experience every time whether it was like, I started my first social enterprise when I was 8 years old, and I did all kinds of community service projects, and I would go and organize events with my friends in our neighborhood. And every time I did that, I was kind of told by my parents, "You're wasting your time. You should be studying." And I happened to do well in school without studying, but that made them even more furious, because they're like, if you actually studied, you'd be the next Einstein or something. And so every time they tried to force me into that, I would run away and do more extracurricular things. And then I started realizing that these things weren't really extracurricular. These were the real learning for life and learning from life. And the extra stuff was actually what was happening in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it was really strange because I was a little bit of a class clown. And so
that surprises me.
Really?
Really?
Yeah. So I was, bored to death in the classroom. So I had to do something to make it fun for everyone. So I would often get sent out of the class, put into, detention, or with all the problem kids, so-called problem kids. And after a little bit, I started realizing that they weren't problem. They're like amazing, sensitive, creative human beings. And they just didn't want to play the game of school. Mm-hmm. And they actually were really, really incredible. And what would happen was I was there, and then after a few days, they'd say, no, go back to the honors classes. This is too easy for you. But it really opened me up to the kind of social injustice that exists within schooling, because most of those kids were both sensitive, but they were oftentimes from low-income families, and they were from minority communities and things. And so I started to see like there's this, this whole kind of way school is organized into a kind of new kind of caste system, and it's like innocent kids being labeled from like when they're kids, like 4 or 5 years old, they get labeled, and then they put in this tracking system. And so I had a lot of questions around that really disturbed me. Mm-hmm. And I felt this is like super, super unfair, and why do they do it? And on top of it, it was like, there was one time I remember I was put in like a gifted class. There's a special gifted class. And I was doing that, and I was like, this should be available for everyone. Why does everyone have to do this? And particularly the kids who were all super sensitive and creative, like this would really help them. But no, they had to go through the regular, all that other nonsensical stuff. And we were getting off of this. So I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. So it started this whole journey where I started questioning the education system. So yeah, lots of these questions were there. And I felt that when I got to college, actually, I started to discover the activist in me. But I was leading this like very weird schizophrenic life. So I was an activist, and then I was like studying business and getting ready to fit into the system and all of that. Mm-hmm. And so it was like created all this kind of weird, uncomfortable things inside me, like who am I really, and what do I really believe in, and things. I thought, okay, I should, there's a lot of pressure from my family and things to get a job and things. So I started my career as an investment banker on Wall Street. When I was there, I started feeling like I could see there was like all kinds of crazy stuff happening of how things were being manipulated, and basically how manipulated in ways so that rich people would get richer, and how things were moving up. And everyone kept saying, no, it's all trickle down economics. It'll be okay. Let rich people keep getting richer, and eventually it'll end up. And
everyone's got a chance if they just work hard enough. And
yeah. So I was like, it's not actually trickling down. It's all gushing up. And on top of it, I just started feeling exactly what you're saying. Like this system is rigged. Mm-hmm. There's nothing at all fair in it. And people are being told all the time, oh, exactly, work hard, or you're not intelligent enough, and that's why you're there. But the game is rigged. I decided to leave there, but I had a very deep, intense desire and dream to serve life and humanity and the planet. So I talked to friends, what should I do? Where should I go? And they're like, oh, you should become an academic. So I ended up going to Harvard then for that. And after a year, I started having all these questions about who is educated and who's not educated. And they used to tell us there that, the world's problems all are because of the uneducated, illiterate people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if everyone just became educated, then everything would be okay. And I thought, my grandmother lives in the village, never went to school, doesn't know how to read and write, but I don't see her causing all the world's problems. In fact, it's the whole opposite. She's like so caring and so kind and compassionate, and she knows how to do things with her hands. And she's probably the most sustainable person I've ever seen living in the world. So I was like, I'm not sure how this is like. And then on the flip side, you see the Wall Street guys who have all gone to elite Ivy League universities, who are supposed to be the most brilliant, intelligent people, who are actually, when you see what they're doing, it doesn't make any sense,
Yeah, or the most creative minds working in the advertising industry.
Exactly.
Selling us things that we don't need.
Exactly. So these questions are, and the other thing I just felt from my grandmother is I started to notice there's this dichotomy between knowing and being. So like we are taught to know a lot and give great podcasts about it and write articles, but on a being level, we're not able to really fully embody that. And I saw my grandmother, a fantastic example of being. She never told me, save water or do this. It was just every drop I noticed for saving. Or one of the things that was like amazing, like we're talking a lot these days in our city about zero waste and all of this. But I saw her, she'd just take some mango peels and she'd dry them outside, and mango seeds, and all of a sudden, in a few weeks, they were vegetables too. She made vegetables out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it was like, she didn't talk about it, she just was living it and doing it. And so I was like, I don't really see my Harvard professors really living that. And so I decided to leave from there also. And then I talked to my friends, what should I do? I want to really serve. So they're like, you want to serve? You should join the UN. So I went, and then I joined, I worked with World Bank and with UNICEF and USAID, and finally I was in UNESCO, and I started to have all these other questions that started popping up from me. And one was, there was a report that had come out when I was there from USAID, and that report said for every $1 of foreign aid that is given, the US corporations earn $10 back in profit.
Wow.
So I read that and my jaw dropped. I was like, what am I doing? I thought I was going to, help people and do something good in the world. And I'm like pimping them, and like really, it's like helping to just continue this pattern of stealing from people. That day, I was in USAID. I resigned that day from there. And I thought, okay, maybe the UN is better. So I started and went in and worked in UNESCO on something called Learning Without Frontiers. The idea behind that was like, okay, the current education system is based on, 18th century factory model, industrial model, and we need to relook at what's the new models for the 21st century. So I started looking into it more and more, and the more people I talked to from all kinds of disciplines, cognitive science, neuroscience, and anthropology, and every person I was talking to, they're like, this model of factory schooling doesn't make any sense for society and for human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started asking, why are we perpetuating this same model? And I started feeling more and more that this model, I mean, at best, one would say it's irrelevant to most of it, and I felt that in my own life. But at worst, this is a criminal activity. We are actually dumbing people down. We're destroying their creativity. We're making them, in culture after culture, people are becoming disconnected from their culture. They're becoming embarrassed of their culture. Or ashamed of their culture, and they lose connection with the natural world and with their communities. And so there's something that's going drastically wrong. And so maybe education, as we've known it, is not part of the solution, which is what all the UN agencies were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it is one of the core problems that's leading to the crisis that we are facing. So this kind of insight, this shook me. I was like, what am I doing? And so at age of 20, I just decided to resign and move back to India. And there was all of these different experiences I started connecting. And the one thing that happened just before I resigned is I got a copy of this book, In Swaraj, by Gandhi, where he basically questions the entire system, and not only at the, this not working or something, but the deepest foundations of it. So I was reading that, and every page I was almost weeping, because I'd seen what he was talking about in all these different experiences. So it's I can't do this, and I need to figure out, it's not just a matter of changing jobs or getting a new technology in place or designing better curriculum or something. It's much more fundamental. And so I thought, what's the best thing I can do? It requires a kind of radical shift in mind and being. So I resigned and I moved back to India, and I thought I should be at the feet of my village illiterate grandmother and make her my guru. And so for 9 years, I lived with her. And so I have two very strong gurus in the last years. One is my grandmother, and the other is my soon-to-be 16-year-old daughter who's never gone to school.
Mm-hmm.
And these two people have given me a deep insight into a whole different set of realities and possibilities and world that exists beyond what my schooled conditioned mind knew.
So we'll come back to that in a second. How did it feel when you made that decision that you were going to leave the system that you knew and go back to India? You hadn't been there for a long time, and give up, I guess, all of these successful things that made your life valid in the terms in which you were part of in the world that we know. A lot of people would say that it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a lot of people
told my parents also. It didn't have to be a lot of people. It was
yeah.
But there's actually one thing that happened, which I forgot to. I had a baby enlightenment, a tiny one, not a grand Buddha type. But when I was on Wall Street, I basically was 22 years old and had all of a sudden was given everything. 5-star hotels, Armani suits, and Ferrari cars and limousines and supermodels. If you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street, I was I was the wolf. And
can't imagine you as the wolf.
You can't.
Well, I guess.
Yeah. So, and amazing parties and all kinds of. So it was I would say my year of absolute decadence.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that year, I was okay, what's next? What's beyond this? And I would look at the managing partners, and they'd be still in this phase. There was and nobody had anything beyond this. And so I was this is it. This is not the meaning of my life. It has to be something more. And so, but what was a gift that I received was that most people spend their lives running after that and hoping they'll get it someday. And I got it at 23. And I said, this is not what I want to do with my life. So that was one piece of it. And the second thing was when I was in UNESCO, the whole thing came crashing down.
Mm-hmm.
I went into a kind of a deep kind of despair and hopelessness. And the whole game is rigged, and it's totally screwed up. And the guys we've given all the power to figure it out, they have no idea what to do. And I became very, very uncomfortable with the notion of expert.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was crazy. I would be flown into countries by UNICEF and UNESCO, knowing nothing about them. I went once and somebody told me, he's do you speak Russian? I don't know anything about Russian. I was well, you're going in 2 days to Azerbaijan and you're going to tell them how to they should reform their entire education system. And I was like 26. I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, go, you do it. And I went there, and I was like, I would wake up at nights looking around like, what am I doing? In the morning, the minister would be meeting me and asking all kinds of things. And I was like supposed to pretend like I knew what. And then I met a lot of other senior experts. And, you know, you'd be like, okay, oh, they're talking like really big game and this and that and so impressive. And you go at night with them and you have a couple of beers and they're like, we don't know what the heck to do. We have no idea what's going on. We can tell you some of the problems, but we're not going to put our skin in the game on any solution we propose.
Yeah.
So I was like, we are totally screwed if this is what's going on.
I had a similar experience being in politics in my early 20s. And so being in DC, working for a congressman, interning, I would write speeches that he would then just go and do. And I'm like, or I'd write talking points. And, you know, I was very diligent and I did my best, but I was just a 22-year-old kid from London, like there in DC. And I found it really shocking. I was like, well, he's just going to take that into that meeting and read what's on there. And it's,
it's, like, it's scary. It's scary.
And also like you, I mean, you know, one of the best bits of working in politics from my perspective at the time was that the drinking was really fun in Westminster and also in DC. The culture of like the staff on in politics is always really fun. And then you think, okay, these are the people that are
making decisions for the entire planet.
Yeah.
So that put me in deep despair and disillusionment and depression. And it wasn't like I was choosing. It was just made sense, you know. So while everyone was telling me it's crazy and you have a career in the UN, like what everyone aspires for, and I was like, no, this is not my work. So it was a little bit scary, obviously. Luckily, I met my wife, and we both resigned from our jobs when we got married, just before we got married. So I felt a lot of also courage and support from her to do that.
And did you know what it was you wanted to create, or did that kind of come from spending time with your grandmother and being for a while?
Yeah. So we knew we had a like very vaguish idea. I mean, we created a space, we called it the Shikshantar, which we put the subtext, the People's Institute for Rethinking Education Development. So up until when we started, there was like this kind of think tanky feel, because that's what I had experienced. But it very quickly evolved out of that mode, and large part because of my grandmother, but also because of the other kinds of, we had all these kids who had left school, started coming to the center and space we had. And so to be meaningful, then we couldn't be like this proper office type of space, you know. I think the one thing is that we made a couple of things and we weren't as kind of collective decisions to start. So one was we weren't going to take any money from governments or corporations or international agencies. We wanted to have our freedom to actually evolve. And we actually, the other thing is I saw a lot of people, young people like my age, who left the corporate world, joined the NGO world, and got even more cynical. And
burnt out.
And burnt out,
then
exactly.
It's like you're working all those hours.
Yeah.
And you don't have the 5-star hotels and the first class flights and everything.
And so then they're like, no, this doesn't make sense. But I thought, let's create a space where we need to think beyond this model of development and the system that we have. And it has to be a very creative and free-flowing space. So that was the simple thing. And we had one question only, because I had read this, I told you, Swaraj. So Swa means self. And it's beautiful because it embodies both the individual self and the collective interdependent self. And Raj literally means rule over, but I read it more like harmony. So harmony of the self. And so Gandhi had raised this as the core purpose of the freedom struggle. He's like, it doesn't matter if you get rid of the British or not. That's not what the freedom. It's like, how do we build a life and systems which create harmony of the self? And so that question stuck with me. I'm like, okay, this is what we have to explore and figure out. And what's the models of learning and education and wisdom and creativity that are going to help us do that? So that was the question. So there was no mission statement, no all of those vision statement, all that stuff you guys we're all taught to do it for make a business plan. So none of that.
Yeah.
And so that, and then the other thing was that we're going to run this in the spirit of gift culture.
Mm-hmm.
Very early on, we did some publications. So like everyone's like, oh, you should put a copyright on this. And we said, no, we're going to put copyleft on everything we do. And it'll be shared freely with people and people can contribute to it.
And this is a long time before like Creative Commons.
Yeah, this
existed.
is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago. Yeah. So, and we didn't have any project we were running, let's say, for anybody. So it was whoever was flowing in the door became, part of co-creating this. And we were able to just kind of, because we weren't implementing it, we were able to dance with them and co-create things. And so we had, people like, I remember one of the kids who came in was Vishal, and he was just fantastic at taking anything and designing something beautiful out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You give him some old wires and he'll take it and he'll like make this beautiful lampshade out of it, And so we later came onto the term upcycling.
Mm-hmm.
And because of Vishal, we got into upcycling in a big way. And then because of Vishal, we started. And he came in when he was 16 years old. We started getting into this whole idea of zero waste then. What does that mean? So he was there, or somebody else, Sunny. Sunny came in, and he would love cooking. And his family wouldn't let him really cook in the house. His mother wouldn't allow him much in the kitchen. So we had our kitchen in Shikshantar. So he would start coming and every day come and cook something and experiment. And he got into slow food cooking with us. And today he runs one of the top 10 healthiest restaurants in India. It's called Millets of Mewar. And he left school after 10th also. So we had all these people who were keen. We called them not dropouts, we called them walkouts.
What's 10th? How old are they?
Oh, when they were in 10th, they would be like 16 years old. Yeah. And then the one thing, an interesting thing, when I met my wife, we made one agreement. So I said, if we have kids, I don't ever want to send them to school. And I was expecting her to say no and run away. And she said, yeah, let's do it. And so we thought, let us, I had read this African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. So I'm like, I'm just this dude and my wife, and it says nuclear family is the stupidest idea that humanity has ever thought of. So let us start to build a joint family. So my grandmother and grandfather were living with us. And then my sister moved back from the US and she was living with us. And so that was there. And then our center became an extension of that joint family. It still functions like that. And so, but then I thought, what actually is happening is it's not a village who's raising a child. It's my child who's helping me raise a village again.
Mm-hmm.
She's inspiring me to create, because I had lost that village.
Mm-hmm.
I had lost my language. I had lost my village connection and everything. And so my daughter was born, and I said I would like to recover all of these things. So that became a very important piece of the kind of larger operating framework we were creating.
And kids have this magical way of bringing everyone together.
Totally. And I would love her taking her when she was a kid. I'd love taking her to serious conferences, and because she was just totally disruptive, disoriented people, and got them out of their usual blah blah blah. And so she was for a while my secret weapon. And then she said, "I'm not doing it anymore." So then I had to do that. Then so that's the role I play now.
You play it well.
Thank you.
You talk a little bit about disruption. Why is it that generally adults are so scared to disrupt things as they are?
So generally it's because there's a lot of fear, I think. And that's something I felt put into us from a very early age, and because of kind of education, Tagore, who was a famous freedom fighter and poet, he would talk about real education as something that creates fearlessness. But I saw that it's always like people are more and more afraid to take risks. You see like MBAs out there. People who do MBAs are not risk takers, right? It's like the entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs are not coming from that frame usually. They're like free from a lot of that. So when people get fearful, they get a bit rigid into their boxes of this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or this is who I am. It creates a lot of, I think, challenges. And so as we kind of got deeper in the journey, we started to figure out that actually the most important thing that we can do right now in the world is to support unlearning. And we were I was the perfect person for that, with all this layers and layers of conditioning and fear and this competitive spirit of like, I have to win the argument, and so many different layers I started seeing in myself and unraveling them, and not doing it just through talking, but through really different deep experiential things, whether it was working with the body or doing things in nature or being in a kind of community space or experimenting with deep acts of kindness and trust, but a whole range of different things to start to unlearn all of this conditioning and fear and rigidness, and even sometimes this arrogance of we know.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably, I see even in the alternative movement today, that's the thing that scares me the most, is people create alternatives and then they start acting like we know we have the final solution and this is the thing. And so that's been kind of a big piece of what I've gotten deeply into.
How can we move things forward if no one has the final solution? I'm just thinking that when campaigners or in policy, it's like, well, okay, well, what's the solution then?
Yeah.
And that's always the question. It's like, well, if you don't have the solution, then we can't do anything about it. Or we do have a lot of good ideas that could shift things that we ignore.
That's a good one.
They're two kind of different questions of why we ignore good ideas that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, why we feel that we have to have a solution.
Yeah, so we are still living in the era of centralized strategic planning that dominates our mind. And so we need to have, and it's very interesting, these past few days I was talking about, because Oroville is kind of a utopian dream, right? This is one of the things, but it's built on having a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been our orientation, and what we're actually inviting people and saying, what if we don't have a plan? What if there's no solution? How do we enter in a different space of relationships and creativity? And even worse, like, what if the solutions we're offering right now that we have on the table, what if they're actually making things worse?
Or boxing us in.
Or boxing us in. But really, I'm saying, like, most of the tools that we're using are to solve the crisis are actually making the crisis worse.
Yeah. Okay, can you give an example?
Well, education, right?
Yeah.
Putting schools in villages. So assuming that a village that doesn't have a school has no knowledge, no capacity to solve its problem, no wisdom, no connection with its ecosystem, right? And going and taking a school and telling kids all of a sudden, none of this matters. Here you go. We're giving you this education system. And now you are totally dependent on the money system, and we don't have any jobs for you. And now you have the Indian government saying, well, in the next 20 years, there's going to be 180 million unemployed educated youth.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Annegret Afolderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.